This is Katie, co-host of Coffee with Keith and Katie. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
What's up, everybody? This is Christian Heimel, host of Press Row here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Press Row, where we talk about the biggest issues in sports with the analysts, experts, and reporters who cover them. No nonsense, hard-hitting interviews on the sports topics you're talking about. A new show comes out every single Thursday. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Press Row. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hello and welcome to your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. My name is Brice Burge.
And I'm Ivan Sanchez Carrasco. Brice, today we're going to cover the recap of Man United Spurs, going to the Bundesliga, which starts back up again this weekend. And then we're going to talk MLS and NWSL draft / combine. And we're going to finish off with some Tata Martinez news now that he's finally hired by Mexico.
Your Soccer Passport is sponsored by Squadcast. As podcasters that deal with analysts and guests from around the world, being able to record remotely is key. Current industry standards rely heavily on internet connection, but Squadcast changes that with a simple browser-based tool that requires no additional software to install. The audio is recorded locally as high-quality WAV files, then uploaded to the host computer, allowing some great audio quality. To get started with your remote podcasting recording experience, go to squadcast.fm for your 14-day free trial. All right, let's talk about that Spurs-Man U game. Despite the stats really siding with the Spurs, Man U takes the 1-0 final. How did Manchester win this game?
I think they won it behind David De Gea on goal, who was absolutely spectacular. He made numerous saves. Spurs kind of controlled most of the game, and they had a lot of opportunities. But David De Gea was on one that day. Yesterday. No one could get by him. He was absolutely phenomenal. You know, there's been a lot of talk about Alisson being the best keeper in the EPL now, the Liverpool keeper. But, you know, De Gea put his stamp and kind of reminded everybody why he's been the best player for United the last 3-4 years. And then a beautiful counterattack as well. United to get their goal right before halftime. Pogba, who was kind of blackballed by Mourinho, shows up big and plays this lovely through ball from inside his own half to get Rashford on a one-up to get Rashford to go at goal, and he finishes this back post shot really nicely to give them the lead. And, you know, I think it was on De Gea, but also I think between the ears, that's how they won this game. I think the United were very mentally strong and were willing to take a couple of shots to a couple of haymakers from Spurs to kind of keep. And they didn't lose their cool. They didn't lose their composure or anything. And I think that's how they won. They won from fantastic goalkeeping, a nice counter, and using their heads and not losing their cool. I think with Mourinho, this is a game they would have lost.
You know, that's an interesting way to bring that forward, just because when I look at what this Man U team used to be, they weren't able to withstand anything. They were soft. And being soft in sports is just not something that's okay. But when you look statistically at everything, when you look at over 200 more passes for Tottenham, and you have so many more shots, more on goal, you know, and just that overall 62 to 38 possession, it is truly amazing in my mind just how many times that Man U had to withhold everything and withstand what the Spurs gave them, and they were able to do that. I think that creates a real interesting lineup now, because now when you're talking about replacing Mourinho and putting Gunner in, and it's still in that interim role, when is it time to start talking about maybe this shouldn't be an interim thing?
So after the season, there's still a lot of soccer left to play. They still have a Champions League with PSG matchup, which now looks more interesting than it did when it first came out. I think they're still 6 points behind, or they're 7 points. Sorry, they're 5 points behind Spurs now, or sorry, 4 points behind Chelsea for that last Champions League spot. And so if he can get that going, if he can make the Champions League, if he has a nice little run or if he can get in the Champions League and have a nice run in Champions League, then you can discuss it. But I think the thing with United is you can't rush everything. They've been rushing things ever since they let go of Ferguson. So you can't rush this again. This has to be the right appointment this time. So they brought Ole in for that reason, to kind of settle the ship and get them playing well. This was his first test. He passed it. It was, I think, besides the result and kind of not get outplayed, but they kind of got pushed to the limits and were dominated by a Spurs team who are going to be kicking themselves. This is the kind of result that you want to see from a coach, and he still has a couple more months to show that he can have this long term. So I think with United, you have to be patient. You can't jump the gun. You have to see what other coaches open up, what's there, and kind of think of the long term here for United going forward.
When you look at that new setup too going in, it's hard when you've got the things that are staring you straight down in the face right now. You're tied right now in that fifth place spot right now with Arsenal for 41 points. You got Brighton coming up this week, and then afterwards you got an FA Cup matchup with Arsenal, which will be a big factor for Man U moving forward and showing that depth. And it's a really good example of what you can avoid as a coach too, because you literally got a setup game, a middle of the line, a middle of the table team that you have to make sure that you can't drop any points against. You got to get the win and then move on to this big FA Cup game, because even though that it's just FA Cup, it's still something that is going to be telling throughout the rest of the year, because it is Arsenal. And it is something that is even more important, because even though that this won't count for the standings in the EPL, it is still something that will give a lot of momentum to the next time that these two teams play. Let's change things up just a little bit, though. Let's jump over to Germany and the Bundesliga. With that setup, they're just past the halfway point. Dortmund, Bayern, Mönchengladbach is up top. Stuttgart, Hannover 96, Nuremberg sit in the relegation zone. Lots of storylines they're going to go to, and we haven't really talked about the Bundesliga a lot on this show, so we're just going to let this be open concept. And what were some of the storylines that you kind of saw out of the Bundesliga so far this first half?
I think it was how bad Bayern Munich started the season off. We're kind of used to Bayern Munich dominating or getting off to a hot start, but they fell off really early this season. New head coach Niko Kovac comes from Frankfurt, I believe, and they started off super slow. I think at one point they were 10 points behind. Right before the break, they've crawled their way back, 6 points behind Dortmund, who's come out flying. So I think that's the biggest surprise so far this season has been one, how well Dortmund's played. Not really a surprise, but the fact that they lead the league, and then that Bayern Munich is 6 points behind. And I think that's kind of the biggest one, is how Munich has struggled so far. And can they picked it up a little bit towards the end. Can they continue to pick it up? And I think how bad kind of my man Neuer's been in goal too. He's not, usually I ride for him as probably the best keeper in the world, but he's been very bad this year too. So for me, it's about how bad Munich's been to their standards.
To their standards, I think is a big factor, just because they've won 5 straight near the end of the year to jump into second place over Mönchengladbach, and Leipzig's right there too, with 31 points to round out that top 4. You talked about good goalies. Golassi's done a really good job this year for RBL when they've been inside the league play. I mean, you might be able to change that up when you've gotten in a Champions League or anything along those lines, just because he has shown to struggle a little bit more in international play away from the Bundesliga. But, when you've got what Munich is finally coming together for, it's almost kind of like the exact opposite of what we expected to happen in Chelsea when they got a new coach, and almost like a greater grace period per se. But that's not the case with with what Chelsea's brought to the table, that has been the story for Bayern Munich. And now Munich is trying to catch up. They have the ability to catch up, though, by the way. I mean, this is still one of the greatest teams in the world. They just got moved into the ESPN and the Fox Soccer Power Rankings top 10 for the first time in a while. So, this is still a team that you have to pay a lot of attention to. But even though with that push, I feel like just because they're getting better doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the league hasn't improved. I mean, the Bundesliga has kind of been down, in my opinion, the last 2-3 years, and it seems like at least there's depth. It seems like everybody kind of took it up a notch, maybe not the biggest notch in the world to really make a difference as an overall thing, but this league seems considerably deeper than it has been in the last couple of years, and I think that's a factor, and I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that as a whole. Like, is this league better than what it was last year?
I think so. I think so. The German league is really well structured, where it helps produce. They help produce their own quality. There's a very good youth structure that gets brought up within each kind of team, and so that's why you kind of see dips with some teams, some well-known teams. I think this year is more of a more upkeep with it, more positive for it, and I think that's good for the league. And it is better. And there is some very good quality soccer in the Bundesliga. Actually, I think on a week-to-week basis, where you're not talking about the heavy hitters from the Bundesliga and the EPL, kind of the mid-table games, are probably more or better quality soccer, actually, probably in the German league than it is in the EPL. And I think a lot of it does have to do with that there is more depth this year. I mean, you look at a team like Schalke, who's in the Champions League, and they're 13th right now, and they've only gotten 18 points. So there is kind of an inconsistency, too, with these teams and what European soccer kind of does to them, too. But while still Bayern Munich they're the haves, and the rest of the league, for the most part, is kind of the have-nots. So I think that's why it's still more surprising. For example, they just bought the French right back from Stuttgart, who won the World Cup, Haval, and they just paid $38 million for him to get a World Cup winning right back who will join them next year. So that's kind of the way how Bayern Munich rolls compared to everybody else. A lot of these teams can produce great talent, and Bayern Munich are the first ones to get the shot at buying them. So I think that's why it's surprising. But you're right, the Bundesliga has been a little deeper. Leipzig's good. Wolfsburg, Frankfurt's always has a good quality team. So it's always great soccer to watch, even if it's not competitive towards the top. And now this year it is competitive towards the top, with Dortmund coming off hot and Bayern Munich trying to catch them.
And you get that aspect a little bit more in other leagues, and that's kind of been the way that it goes. The Portuguese league, I think, is pretty similar to it, where you have your top teams, or the Mexican league, I thought, was like that this year too, where you got your top 4 teams and then everybody else is just in a dogfight. And that's kind of similar to what is going on right now. I mean, it's still it's a very steady drop. It's almost that perfectly straight line between place and how many points. You don't have like the plateaus. You don't have the separate tiers that you typically have. It creates an interesting race at the bottom too, just because like Augsburg's only 1 point ahead of Stuttgart, and they just traded away for a bunch of depth too. Like they're able to get some of their stronger players up by moving some pieces around to avoid that relegation aspect, because right now it's Stuttgart, Hanover, and Nuremberg. Hanover and Nuremberg both have 11 points. They're a win behind Stuttgart, creating a real interesting spot for that last relegation location as you pay attention to things moving along. But I couldn't agree more with the way that you described some of these other games, especially with like, what was it the other day that I was watching? I think it was Hertha and Freiburg or something like that, maybe Mainz. But it was just a great game. It was back and forth. It was that perfect balance between a game that was focused on individual players and individual battles while also allowing the team concepts. And I've always appreciated sports that allow more team concepts to be on the map instead of letting an individual player take over a scenario. And that's something that I think has been really good in the Bundesliga this year. That's been different than other times.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I like your point you make about the how the league, there's not this huge drop off in tiers, like you said. Like when we talked about the EPL last year, you kind of had your top 6 tier, then you kind of had your bottom 6 tier, and then you had your middle tier. And in that, you don't really see that in the Bundesliga. Everything's kind of spread. You get if Bayern Leverkusen gets on a little run, they're ninth and they have 24 points, a couple wins and they're in fourth or fifth, only 7 points behind, 9 points behind. So a little different than kind of the La Liga or EPL when you see these drop offs. I think that was a good point that you made that I really liked.
On that note, I think we'll take a break. We'll head into worldwide headlines up next, talking about some of the other big news in the soccer world. And then we'll come back, we'll stay domestic, and look at the MLS Combine and the NWSL Draft here on Your Soccer Passport on Public House Media, sponsored by Squadcast.fm.
This is John Lauder, host of The Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, The Cheap Seats, where we talk about sports from the fans' perspective. A new show comes out every Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Cheap Seats. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome back to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. I'm Brice Burge, Yvonne Sanchez Carrasco 2. Follow us on Twitter at Yvonne Sanchez C90, at that Brice Burge, and at Your Soccer Pass. Lots of additional commentary and stuff there for you to follow, so go ahead and give us a like. Tata Martinez finally hired in as the Mexican national team coach on January 7th, leaving Atlanta United. The Argentine gets another national spot. I know that for you this means a lot more for a lot of reasons. So I'm just going to give you the floor in this case. Why is this finally such a big news, and why did it take so long to sign him?
If I'm assuming why it took so long to sign Tata Martinez, it'd be probably because they had to work out some contract things, little things like in that sort of manner. It's a hire because he's coached some important clubs. He's coached some important national teams. He's had success, relatively good success wherever he's gone. He just came off an MLS Cup, which is important. And it's important to see how he built the team. I think that's the most important thing with what he did with Atlanta United, how he kind of built the culture there and kind of had everybody on the same page as a head coach. He's coached Barcelona. He's coached Argentina. He took Paraguay to the quarterfinals. And Paraguay is probably the most similar to Mexico compared more to Argentina. We just don't have the talent that Argentina did. So comparing to what he did with Paraguay to what we hope he does with Mexico, I think that's kind of the most comparable thing. Why it took so long? It's the Mexican Federation. That's probably why. But I'm excited to see what he does with this team and what he does this first year. You have the Gold Cup coming up, which is important for Mexico to win, and how he's able to balance the veteran players like an Andres Guardado and Hector Moreno with younger players coming up like Diego Lainez and and Edson Alvarez and players like that. Finding that balance. I mean, he left a situation where he was loved by thousands of people in Atlanta. And already within the first week after he's been hired, there's already criticism. The people are already giving him backlash, like Hugo Sanchez for not being Mexican and coaching the Mexican national team. So that's the kind of stuff he has to prepare for, the kind of ridiculousness that is the Mexican journalism, soccer journalism, and Mexican pundits and Mexican fans. But it's going to be a lot. Mexican fans require a lot and request a lot and almost have too high of expectations for what to expect. But I think Martinez is as good of a hire you can get in the national team. I think if you compare it to the U.S. national team with Greg Bellhopper, I think this is a better hire overall, and I think that kind of shows the ambition Mexico has on wanting to take the next step.
Okay, let's for interest in time make sure that we transfer over to the next issue. We'll talk about the drafts. MLS had their combine and draft. Frankie Amaya from UCLA goes first overall on the men's side. On the women's side, Tierna Davidson, the defenseman from Stanford, goes to the Red Stars with the first overall pick. Very interesting way that this draft went down for both sides. Very different type scenarios, just because you've got the men's side of the draft where once you get to the third or fourth round, people will pass. They won't take everybody. You've got a lot of schools from the Big Ten and the Midwest, and you'll get some weird players that will pop up from like an NAIA school or like Denver or something like that. Then the women's side is very, very established, very important. So it is kind of an interesting aspect of how these drafts kind of broke down in their own rights. Was there any storylines that really kind of stood out to you with these two things, or was it just kind of like a they happened type thing?
More leaning towards that it happened. I did find it interesting. I believe it was the Union who gave up all their draft picks. They didn't want any draft pick, which kind of made me think about a question I had for you about the MLS or the concept of drafts in soccer. I mean, are they needed? Do we need a combine? Do we need to see do we need to see these players do 30-yard dash, a 5-10-5 shuttle run, and a vertical jump, the things they did at the combine? Does the league need a draft? I guess is kind of was kind of like what I thought about after seeing the Union passing up all their draft picks and trading them all away. Because it's one of the most American sport concepts that the MLS has adopted, and the NWSL. Because, they do a good job of kind of finding things that works in American sports and try to bring it into the MLS, and things that work in European soccer and bring into the MLS. And I'm just wondering if the draft and the combine is something that's really needed. I don't know.
I think the combine probably isn't, but I think when you look at the way that NCAA soccer and just any NCAA sport as a whole works compared to pretty much any other country besides Canada and a little bit of Australia, they don't have collegiate sports the way that the United States do. And that makes a really unique situation. So when you're looking at drafts, I think the only real places I can see drafts happening that I can think off the top of my head is when you're dealing with Aussie rules football in Australia, the CFL, they have one. But you also have hockey. In the NHL, they do it too. So a lot of it has to deal with specifically what the youth scenario and setups are. And when you look at soccer, most of the players that are picked out of the soccer classes are not dealing with international money and international players. You're dealing primarily with players that have played in the NCAA. And that creates a really unique aspect of how it all kind of goes about. In the MLS, when you're talking about the Union trading away all their draft picks, it's because Union probably has one of the stronger youth programs in the MLS out of any franchise right now. And they got a lot of credit for that. But more importantly, it is very important to talk about who they were sending those draft picks to. They sent every single one of their draft picks to Cincinnati, which is brand new, with the exception of growing up from a USL team to begin with. So, when you look at that development aspect, Cincinnati needs those draft picks, and Cincinnati was also one of the teams that decided to pass on draft picks later on in the third and fourth round. They took a couple of third-round draft picks, but they passed on all their fourth-round ones, which is also very telling about maybe you don't need 4 rounds of the draft, but you can move it to a basketball thing where you have 2 rounds of the draft. That might be a little bit more of a situation that might make it work compared to whether or not it's needed. Because I think it's still needed in that regard, because you still need the ability to kind of get the players that said, no, I want a college education. No, I grew up in rural America and didn't get a chance to play with a travel team that was worth a darn. No, my parents were poor as dirt and weren't able to put me in a team that would have given me any kind of look at an academy. I needed the college level to grow up and be a better soccer player. So if you want to talk about youth development in the United States, very simply, we are too poor, too spread out to not ignore the collegiate system and the benefits that it could happen. Even if you're talking only about 3 or 4 players a year that can make a difference coming from the NCAA system, you are still talking about too many great opportunities to pass up. You got to take it. So,
well, Well, I guess for my counter to that is why you need a draft for that. If you have scouts watching these players, or soccer now, you can watch most college games on it's streamed somewhere. Why can't you just sign them once they graduate?
Because
in that case, instead of having a draft,
it's all
and then
marketing.
just have. Yeah, but like I'm pretty sure people aren't like really watching the MLS draft. The last time I watched the MLS draft was because my buddy Eric Hurtado was drafted 5th, but I haven't watched the MLS draft since then. But if people are already watching these players from the collegiate level, just sign them after they graduate instead of having a draft to go through it. If you know what I mean, because you already have these teams setting up a youth system with youth teams.
A draft still allows some other aspects. You still have to deal with NCAA eligibility, where like in college hockey, you have the ability to draft players and then not have them come up. So like there's eligibility issues that are key in dealing with that. I know that there were some underclassmen that were signed to future contract scenarios out of Indiana, Michigan, your Big Ten schools, your Midwest schools. But so you've got that like keep on the side type thing availability that college has. The additional aspect of it is that a draft for people that are looking at getting money to these college programs, something that the Big Ten has done better than anybody else in all of college sports and in college soccer specifically, is talking about how the draft impacts their other sports, not just football and basketball. They do draft coverage on Big Ten Network for soccer, for hockey, for softball, because there's a softball draft too, even though that's even less relevant than any of the other ones. So when you look at the potential for marketing and then all the money that comes on the back side of it for your programs to make your programs better, colleges I think want the draft, and that's something that makes it more cost beneficial for them in the long term of what college athletics is supposed to be doing, which is to advertise your product and bringing more students to your campus. And so that when you put that stuff together, I can see why you wouldn't need it. But the flip side of this too is that you've included the NWSL as well in the pretense of this conversation. The NWSL is absolutely crucial, and it has to be done because now you've got the women from the United States being bigger and better than ever, and for the first time ever, you're allowed to sign underclassmen. When Davidson came out of the draft as a junior to sign with the NWSL, she's able to get that spot, probably be the youngest person on the team, heading to France this year as part of the World Cup. That's a big deal. The other side of that, too, is the development and availability of some of the Caribbean nations and Central American nations that are sending their women's soccer players to play in the United States, in the NCAA, to make them better and give them better competition to learn from. Every single player on the Jamaican women's national team played NCAA soccer, whether it was like D1 programs, small D1 programs that aren't good, or even there were some D3, D2 players in there as well. Those players are getting unquestionable experience in the NCAA market that can directly allow them more professional opportunities moving forward, where if they were to have breakout years and play for the right NCAA teams, for the women's side, that's even bigger, in grabbing these prospective players from smaller countries. And when you look at the NWSL and what their global footprint is, and the fact that we're still decades behind in developing girls' talent compared to boys' talent, before they get up to full-grown men and women, it is still a problem that we have. And in the NWSL, it's completely worthwhile. In the men's side, I would just cut it down to two rounds, with a supplemental third round if you want to get a little wonky with it, because there's so many weird aspects in contracts for the MLS that if you did it that way, I think it would be most beneficial. I don't think it has to be 4 rounds anymore. But again, when you're playing into it, it's so different on the men's and women's side of the ball compared to what we kind of expect. There's just a lot of culture there that we didn't talk about in terms of marketing that will make it better for all involved.
Okay. And for the record, I wasn't saying don't get players coming out of college. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah. No,
I
got that too. It's about how they're expressed.
Yeah, I'm asking the concept of drafting instead of if you want to get a player, have a bidding war for them like you would if they wanted the guy who went number one, whoever wants him. Well, if he's worth number one, if he's that good, whoever wants him pay up for it. It was kind of more my mentality. And also like just the combine concept. You don't need that's more also where I was coming from. Not that you don't need college not that you shouldn't get college players. It's more, do you need to put a bunch of these players all in one place and have them go through drills and have them go through things that you would at an NFL combine when there are two different concepts? For example, Messi, we don't need to know Messi's 30-yard dash. We know Messi's fantastic. You see it watching. That kind of a thing. You know what I mean? I don't need to see the rigors of going through doing 5-10, 5 shuttles to see if someone's good on the ball. I need to see him on the ball, see what he can do, see his decision making. I guess that's kind of my mentality from it.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at those stats that come out of the combine, you're starting to see more and more even NFL teams, the teams that kind of started making the combine such a big deal, get away from certain tasks that they do. The 40-yard shuttle is so overrated. I mean, and that's in all sports. But, I mean, we'll see how it goes. I mean, if the last thing that I'll say on this issue is that if it makes money for the MLS, they're going to stay doing it until either people stop showing up and paying a registration fee, or they can't sell the rights to it to either advertise it or market it or put it on social media or something that's going to give them extra eyes to care about the MLS. Then they're going to keep on doing it, and I think that's why they're going to keep on with the combine for a while. I mean, it's a legitimate argument to have, but it's just at this point too, if it's self-sustainable and you're just getting more eyes on it, that's enough for the U.S.
Yeah. Well, it was a good topic for this week, though.
I think so too, and definitely got some good opinions out. And that will wrap it up for the show this week. Let's actually kick back to you. What's your shout out for this week, Yvonne?
Shout out. I'm gonna go a little personal. It was my dad's birthday last week, so shout out to my dad, and it was my parents' anniversary. So shout out to my parents for their anniversary, for keep on keeping on. And so yeah.
Well, congratulations to them on behalf of everybody here at Your Soccer Passport, aka just like me on the other side of things. But happy anniversary, happy birthday to Yvonne's parents and father.
There you go.
All right, we'll take a break, we'll wrap it up this week. Remember, if you want to listen to any other shows, check us out on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever your favorite podcasts are found. You've been listening to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media, sponsored by Squadcast.fm.